What if a single dad, just trying to survive, walked into a blind date and met a woman who could change his life forever? Stay with me as this story unfolds. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next heartwarming story. Noah Miller never imagined his life would turn out this way. At 32, his days began before sunrise on the docks of Seattle, where the cold air bit at his skin and the weight of crates pressed into his back. He wasn't a man who complained. He simply endured because he had someone depending on him. Grace, his 3.5-year-old daughter. With her boundless curiosity and small hands that reached for him every morning, she was the reason he kept moving. Their little apartment wasn't much, peeling paint on the walls, a heater that rattled louder than it warmed. But to Grace, it was a castle as long as her father was there. Most evenings, Noah would collapse into the worn couch with Grace nestled beside him, her laughter filling the quiet spaces of their world. He had long given up on the idea of dating or even dreaming about what could have been. Love, romance, the luxury of thinking about himself. It all felt like a different lifetime, something that belonged to other people. His heart was wrapped tightly around Grace and the simple rhythm of survival. That was why the phone call from Liam, his oldest friend, caught him off guard. "Noah, I need a favor." Liam's voice came crackling through the line. Noah rolled his tired shoulders, already suspicious. "You always need a favor. What is it this time?" There was a pause, then Liam admitted, almost sheepishly, "I can't make it to dinner tonight. It's a blind date. Someone set it up for me. I need you to go in my place." Noah laughed out loud, shaking his head in disbelief. "You want me to show up at a date for you? That's insane." But Liam persisted, promising it would be quick. Just one dinner, nothing more. The more Noah tried to push back, the more his friend pressed until, finally, against all reason, Noah sighed into the phone. "Fine, but I'm bringing Grace." Silence, then a groan from Liam. No, you can't bring a toddler on a blind date." Noah smirked to himself, looking over at Grace, who was coloring on the floor, her tongue peeking out in concentration. "Then let's see how long this woman sticks around when she finds out the date includes a single dad and a 3-year-old. Grace looked up at him, her big brown eyes curious. "Daddy, where are we going?" He scooped her into his arms, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We're going to meet a very pretty lady." She giggled, her small fingers tugging at his shirt. "Is she nice?" Noah's voice softened, touched with dry humor. "I doubt it, but we'll find out." In that moment, as he dressed Grace in her best little blue dress and brushed her curls into some semblance of order, Noah felt the weight of the absurdity. A blind date wasn't in his plans. Not for tonight. Not for any night. He was going, not to open his heart, but to prove to himself, and maybe to the world, that he was too broken, too burdened, too poor for anyone to truly stay. What he didn't know, what he couldn't even imagine, was that this evening would shift the course of his life in ways he had long since stopped hoping for. The city was beginning to glow as evening lights flickered awake. Traffic crawled through downtown Seattle, horns echoing against the glass towers. Noah guided his old pickup toward the restaurant, Grace sitting in her booster seat behind him, humming to herself with her stuffed rabbit clutched tight. He caught her reflection in the mirror and smiled faintly, though his chest felt heavy with nerves. He had told himself this was a waste of time. A blind date wasn't for a man like him, but a promise to Liam was a promise, and Noah Miller kept his word. He parked a block away, buttoned his jacket against the sharp chill in the air, and lifted Grace into his arms. Her little blue dress with yellow flowers peeked out from under her coat, and she rested her cheek on his shoulder as if the night was an adventure she trusted him to lead. They were halfway to the restaurant when Ray's voices cut through the hum of the street. At the curb, beside a yellow cab with its headlights glaring, stood a young woman. Her hair, a cascade of golden blonde pulled loosely into a braid, caught the glow of the street lamp. She wore a beige coat that looked more stylish than warm, and a leather tote hung from her shoulder, her cheeks flushed pink, not from the cold, but from frustration. "I gave you a 20, she said firmly, her voice steady despite the edge. "The fare was 12. You owe me change." The driver snapped back, waving a crumpled bill. "You gave me a 10. Don't waste my time." People passed by, glancing but moving on. Noah slowed, shifting Grace in his arms. He should have kept walking, it wasn't his business. But something in the woman's stance, her chin lifted, her eyes clear, refusing to back down even as the driver loomed over her, stirred him. She wasn't pleading, she wasn't flustered, she was simply standing her ground, unwilling to be dismissed. Without thinking, Noah stepped forward. "Is everything all right here?" His voice was calm, low, carrying more weight than volume. The cabbie shrugged, muttering about being late. Noah slipped his hand into his pocket, pulled out a 20, and pressed it against the driver's hand. That should cover it. The man snatched the bill and drove off without a thank you, leaving behind the smell of exhaust. The young woman turned to Noah, her blue-gray eyes widening in surprise. For a beat, they just looked at each other, strangers caught in a strange moment. Then she shook her head slightly. "You didn't have to do that. I had it handled." Noah adjusted Grace higher on his hip, his tone dry. "Sure looked like it." He started to step back, but the woman reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a $1 bill, folded and worn. She held it out to him. He frowned. "What's this?" "I don't like owing strangers," she said simply, her gaze steady. There was no trace of flirtation, no softening of her voice. She meant it. For the first time, Noah really looked at her. There was elegance in her features, yes, but more than that, a quiet pride. He sensed she was the kind of person who would rather walk away empty-handed than feel indebted to someone she didn't know. He took the bill slowly, tucking it into his pocket. "Thanks," he said, almost more to himself than to her. Grace stirred, whispering into his ear with the unfiltered honesty only children possessed. "Daddy, she's pretty." Noah tightened his hold on his daughter, his jaw flexing as if to brush it off. "Don't get any ideas, kid," he muttered, though his thoughts betrayed him. Because something about that woman, the steel in her voice, the storm in her eyes, the strange gravity of a single crumpled dollar bill, lodged itself in his mind. As he walked the remaining steps to the restaurant, he told himself it was just a passing encounter, one of those moments that vanished as quickly as it appeared. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that when he stepped through those glass doors with Grace at his side, fate was waiting at a corner table, and the woman with the golden braid would no longer be a stranger. The restaurant's golden light spilled onto the sidewalk, soft and inviting against the cool Seattle night. Noah pulled the door open, balancing Grace on one hip, and stepped inside. The air shifted immediately. Low chatter, the faint clinking of glasses, and the rich scent of roasted garlic and butter. He expected nothing more than an uncomfortable dinner, maybe a polite introduction before the woman realized he wasn't worth her time. What he didn't expect was the sight waiting in the corner. There she was, the woman from the taxi, the golden braid, the proud set of her shoulders, the same steady eyes that had refused to yield. She sat at a small table for two, her coat draped neatly over the chair, a navy blue dress falling effortlessly across her frame. Her hands were folded on her lap, as if she had been waiting with practiced patience. For a moment, Noah stopped in his tracks, his breath caught, not out of attraction, at least not the kind he wanted to admit, but out of shock. Of all the possibilities, he hadn't imagined this. Her gaze lifted, and recognition flickered instantly. Her lips parted. "You?" His own response stumbled out, rougher than he intended. "You've got to be kidding me." The maitre d' blinked between them, confused by the exchange. Grace, however, had no such hesitation. She leaned forward from Noah's arms, her voice bright and unfiltered. "Daddy, it's her, the pretty girl from outside." The tension cracked like glass. Emma Collins, because now Noah remembered Liam had mentioned the name, let out a small, surprised laugh, not mocking, just genuine. She pushed her chair back and rose gracefully, lowering herself to Grace's level. "And you must be the little artist," she said warmly, her eyes softening. "Do you have a name?" Grace giggled, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "I'm Grace, and this is Bunny." Emma's smile deepened. "Well, Grace and Bunny, it's very nice to meet you." She glanced up at Noah, her expression unreadable, somewhere between amusement and curiosity. Noah shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his daughter on his hip as though bracing himself. "So you're the blind date." "Seems that way," Emma replied, her tone calm but her eyes searching his. "Liam texted me last minute. Said he was sending someone else. He forgot to mention the stand-in would arrive with his daughter." "She goes where I go," Noah said simply, his voice edged but steady. Emma tilted her head, studying him for a heartbeat before her lips curved. That's all right. She's adorable. Grace wriggled then, stretching her arms toward Emma. Can I sit with you? Noah opened his mouth, instinct ready to say no, but Emma had already extended her arms, welcoming the little girl without hesitation. Grace climbed into her lap as though she belonged there all along, Bunny tucked securely under her chin. Emma adjusted easily, her movements natural, her hands steady as she settled the child. Noah blinked. Grace didn't do that. She rarely trusted strangers, rarely leaned in so quickly. He folded his arms, his expression guarded, though something in his chest shifted at the sight. Emma looked down at Grace, brushing a stray curl from the child's forehead. You have excellent taste in stuffed animals, she teased gently. Grace giggled, leaning closer, already captivated. The maitre d' cleared his throat softly, breaking the moment. This way, sir, he said, gesturing toward the empty seat. Noah pulled the chair opposite Emma and lowered himself into it, with a sigh that was part resignation, part disbelief. He should have been annoyed, maybe even angry. Instead, as he watched Grace beam in Emma's lap, her laughter ringing like a bell across the quiet dining room, he realized the night wasn't unfolding at all the way he planned. And whether he liked it or not, that unsettled him most of all. Dinner began with a strange rhythm, like a song none of them quite knew the words to. Noah sat stiffly across from Emma, his arms folded, his eyes drifting toward the menu, but never truly reading it. He had expected the evening to collapse under its own awkwardness. What he hadn't expected was how easily Grace filled the silence. The little girl perched happily in Emma's lap as though it were the most natural place in the world. Emma didn't hesitate, didn't fumble, didn't glance around the room as if worried about appearances. Instead, she leaned into Grace's chatter, asking her questions about Bunny, about the flowers on her dress, about what color crayon was her favorite. And Grace, his shy, careful child who usually took days to warm to anyone, answered with giggles and bright eyes. Noah watched as the waiter approached. Emma ordered for herself with quiet confidence, then looked to Grace. How about grilled cheese, or would you rather have soup? Grilled cheese, Grace announced, clapping her hands. Emma smiled. Excellent choice. And for your dad? Noah cleared his throat, unsettled by how seamlessly she included him. Steak, he muttered. The waiter nodded and left them, but Noah's gaze lingered on Emma. She wasn't doing this to impress him. She wasn't leaning across the table with practiced charm. She was simply present. As plates arrived, Emma helped Grace break her sandwich into smaller bites, patiently wiping the corners of her mouth when jelly smeared across her cheek. Grace laughed at the gentle touch, and Emma laughed with her, the sound soft and warm. It rang out in a way that felt almost dangerous to Noah. Dangerous because it slipped past his defenses before he could stop it. You're good with her, he said finally, his tone more cautious than complimentary. Emma glanced up, her expression steady. I like kids. They make more sense than adults most days. Grace nodded solemnly, as if she understood. Adults forget to have fun, she declared. Emma chuckled, brushing a curl back from Grace's forehead. She's right. We do forget. Noah leaned back slightly, trying to disguise the tug in his chest. He had told himself this woman would walk away the moment she realized what she was dealing with. A single father, a worn jacket, a life that didn't fit with penthouses and corporate dinners. Yet here she was, holding his daughter as if she belonged in her arms. The meal continued, though Noah barely touched his plate. He found himself watching Emma more than he ate, noting how she didn't talk about her company or her wealth. She asked Grace about bedtime stories, about her favorite cartoons, even about Bunny's adventures. And Grace, completely at ease, offered her every secret as though Emma were an old friend. By the time dessert arrived, a slice of cake Emma insisted they share, Grace was resting her head against her shoulder, eyelids heavy but content. Emma fed her tiny bites with the same care she might give her own child. And Noah felt something shift inside him, something he wasn't ready to name. He had come tonight to prove a point, that no woman would ever stay once they saw the truth of his life. Instead, watching his daughter's smile bloom brighter in Emma's presence, Noah found himself caught off guard. Because for the first time in a long while, the thought that lingered wasn't about someone leaving. It was about what might happen if someone chose to stay. Noah hadn't planned to ask her anything personal. He was content to let Grace's chatter carry the night and to sit back with his guarded silence. But something about the way Emma leaned in when Grace spoke, the way she seemed to listen with her whole self, stirred a question he hadn't expected to voice. "How do you know so much about kids?" His tone was curious, though there was still that edge, that suspicion he carried like armor. Emma didn't bristle. Instead, she lowered her gaze for a moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. When she looked up again, her eyes were steady. "I practically raised my little brother. Our parents died in a car accident when I was 20. He was only 12 at the time." Her words landed gently, but the truth behind them was sharp enough to quiet the table. Grace blinked, her small hands resting on the edge of the plate. "That's sad," she whispered. Emma offered her a small smile, brushing her braid back over her shoulder. "It was, but it also made me stronger. I dropped out of college, gave up a scholarship, and worked 3 jobs so he could finish school. For a while, it was just him and me against the world." She paused, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "It wasn't easy, but I wouldn't trade it. He grew up kind, resilient, someone I'm proud of." Noah studied her, caught off guard by the matter-of-fact way she spoke. No self-pity, no attempt to make the story grander than it was, just truth laid bare on the table between them. "And now?" he asked, his voice quieter. "He's in college studying architecture," Emma said, her smile softening into something wistful. "He calls me too much and not enough, depending on the week. But he's safe. That's all I ever wanted." Grace leaned closer, resting her chin in her hands. "Do you still take care of him?" Emma laughed lightly, shaking her head. "Not the way I used to. He takes care of himself now. But once you've been someone's anchor, a part of you never stops looking out for them." Her gaze shifted back to Noah, then, holding his in a way that felt almost deliberate. For a long moment, Noah didn't speak. He felt something twist inside him, something he had buried under years of exhaustion and grief. Here was a woman who had every reason to close herself off, yet she hadn't. She had endured, and instead of becoming harder, she had become gentler. He cleared his throat, forcing himself to break the silence. "You live a very different life now." Emma gave a small shrug as if wealth and titles meant little. "Yes, I live in a high-rise condo. Yes, I have a car that drives smoother than most people's dreams. But I still make my own coffee in the mornings. I still find peace in baking late at night or reading to a room full of kids who couldn't care less if I'm a CEO. Success gave me comfort, but it never erased who I was before." Noah leaned back, unsettled by how easily her words pierced him. He had expected arrogance, maybe pity. Instead, he found humility wrapped in quiet strength. And as Grace nestled closer into Emma's side, smiling up at her as if she'd known her forever, Noah felt the ground beneath his carefully guarded heart begin to shift. The evening stretched on, the plates now empty except for a few crumbs, and Grace's careful stack of sugar packets arranged like tiny building blocks. Conversation had softened into something easier, though Noah still felt the pull of doubt tugging at him. Emma had shared pieces of her past with such quiet honesty, and for a moment he almost let himself believe she was different. But old habits, old fears, refused to let go. When the check arrived, set discreetly in a leather folder at the edge of the table, Noah reached for it. His fingers brushed the cover, then stilled. A thought crept in, sharp, uninvited. What if everything tonight was an illusion? What if, beneath her kindness, Emma was no different from the others? A woman who might smile at his daughter but recoil the moment she remembered who he really was, a dock worker with worn shoes and a life lived paycheck to paycheck? He let his hand fall back to his lap and leaned slightly into the performance, patting his pockets, first his jacket, then his slacks. He furrowed his brow. "Oh," he murmured, tone carefully neutral. "I must have forgotten my wallet." The words hung there, heavy, daring. He waited for the flicker of irritation, the arched brow, the awkward silence that would confirm what he already believed, that he didn't belong at this table, in this world, with her. But Emma didn't hesitate. She didn't even blink. Instead, she reached calmly into her tote, pulled out a sleek black card, and slid it into the folder. "Then I'll get it," she said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Her voice carried no judgment, no impatience, only ease. Noah stared, caught off guard by the absence of the reaction he expected. "You really don't mind?" he asked, the edge in his tone betraying how much he needed to hear her answer. Emma looked at him steadily, her expression open. Why would I? It's just dinner. Besides, I'm the one who ordered dessert and convinced Grace to share cake with me. Seems fair I cover it. Grace giggled sleepily against her shoulder, smudges of frosting still on her cheek. Emma brushed them away with the corner of a napkin, smiling as if the moment mattered more than the price of the meal. Noah felt something in his chest tighten, then loosen. He'd expected pity or annoyance, the subtle curl of a lip that told him he was less. Instead, she made it seem ordinary, unremarkable, an act of kindness without a second thought. I'll pay next time, he muttered, more to himself than to her. Emma's lips curved with quiet amusement. We'll see. For the first time that evening, Noah found himself without a ready defense. He had set a trap, not for her, but for his own heart, to prove his doubts right, and she had stepped over it gracefully, leaving him with nothing but the uncomfortable truth. Emma Collins was nothing like the woman he thought he understood. She was something else entirely. As they gathered their things, Grace's small hand tugged at Emma's braid, her giggle echoing through the dim restaurant. And Noah, silent as he stood, couldn't shake the thought that, for the first time in years, the world had offered him a glimpse of something he didn't dare hope for. A kindness he hadn't asked for. A chance he wasn't sure he deserved. The night air had cooled by the time they stepped outside, the city humming with its steady rhythm of headlights and footsteps. Noah buckled Grace into her seat, tucking Bunny beneath her arm as she yawned wide enough to make her eyes water. She was asleep within minutes, her soft breathing filling the cab of the truck like a lullaby. He told himself to drive home, to leave the night behind, but his hands lingered on the wheel, his eyes drawn to the figure just ahead. Emma, walking toward a sleek black sedan waiting at the curb. She spoke briefly to the driver, then slid into the back seat. The door shut with a quiet click, and the car pulled away. Noah's chest tightened. That should have been the end of it. A woman like her belonged in another world, a place of chauffeured rides and city skylines, not in the orbit of a dock worker and his little girl. Yet something in him resisted letting go. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe something more dangerous. As traffic thinned, Noah found himself trailing behind at a careful distance. He wasn't proud of it, but he couldn't help it. He wanted to know if the woman who had paid for dinner without blinking, who had wiped frosting from his daughter's face as though it were the most natural thing in the world, was real or just another illusion. The sedan turned onto a quiet street lined with high-rises. Noah parked half a block away, his old truck looking out of place under the polished glow of the street lamps. From where he sat, he could see Emma step out, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. She crossed the lobby of a tall glass building, pausing only to greet the doorman with a smile. Moments later, lights flickered on high above. Noah leaned back, his breath fogging the window. He expected to see champagne flutes, laughter spilling from behind floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of luxury that had no room for people like him. But instead, as he looked up, the picture was startlingly simple. Through the sheer curtains, Emma moved across her apartment with quiet ease. She slipped off her coat, tossed her braid over her shoulder, and sank into an armchair with a book in hand. No crowd, no noise, just silence, broken only by the turning of pages. After a while, she set the book aside and opened her laptop. The glow lit her face as she clicked through files, pausing now and then to scribble notes on a pad of paper. Noah squinted, realizing they weren't work documents, but something else. Flyers for a children's literacy program, lesson outlines. He could just make out the bright drawings scattered across the desk. She wasn't planning her next deal. She was planning a fundraiser for kids who had none of the chances she had fought for. Noah sat back heavily, the weight of what he saw pressing into him. Emma Collins, CEO, polished, powerful, wasn't filling her nights with galas or champagne. She was spending them planning bedtime stories for children who weren't her own. And for the first time, he felt his carefully built walls crack wider. Grace stirred softly in the back seat, murmuring in her sleep. Noah glanced at her, then back toward the lighted window high above. He had tried so hard to convince himself Emma belonged to a world far from his. But as he watched her move through the quiet of her apartment, he realized wealth hadn't hardened her. It hadn't stolen her gentleness, her warmth, or her sense of responsibility. She was rich, yes, but more than that, she was real. And that truth unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. For days after that dinner, Emma lingered in Noah's thoughts like a song he couldn't turn off. He told himself it was foolish. She was from a world he'd never touch. Yet every time Grace asked about her, every time he remembered the sound of her laughter, the picture grew sharper, harder to ignore. He lay awake one night, staring at the cracks in the ceiling of their small apartment. Grace was asleep in the next room, clutching Bunny, safe in her dreams. And Noah, with calloused hands folded across his chest, felt the old weight of fear pressing down. He thought about Emma's condo with its tall windows, about the car that waited at the curb for her. He thought about her soft voice when she talked about raising her brother, about the way she brushed crumbs from Grace's chin like she'd known her forever. And he thought about himself, just a man who hauled crates, who worried about the rent, who measured groceries by how long they would last until the next paycheck. The truth gnawed at him. If he let Emma close, if he let her into his life, it wouldn't be long before the differences became too clear. He pictured whispers, the disapproving looks, the quiet shame of being seen as someone clinging to her success. Worse, he pictured Grace growing attached, only to watch Emma walk away. Noah couldn't risk that. So he wrote a letter, not because he wanted to, but because words on paper seemed easier than watching her face when he told her goodbye. His handwriting was rough, uneven, but the message was steady. Emma, you are everything good and steady in a world I can't seem to belong to. You deserve someone who can stand beside you without hesitation. I can't be that man. I am just a father trying to hold together a life for my little girl. And though you've shown me kindness I'll never forget, I know in the end I would only become a weight you don't need. I would drag you down. Please don't come looking for me. Take care of yourself, and thank you for seeing Grace, for making her laugh. That alone means more than I can say. He signed it quietly. Noah. The next morning, he slid the envelope under the front desk at her office building, then walked away before he could change his mind. That evening, Grace climbed into his lap, her curls tickling his chin. She looked up with wide, trusting eyes. Daddy, why didn't Miss Emma come today? The question pierced deeper than he expected. He swallowed hard, steadying his voice. She's busy, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have a lot to do. Grace frowned, her small brow furrowing. But she said she'd read me another story. Did she forget? Noah pressed his lips together, the ache in his chest almost too much to bear. No, baby. She didn't forget. He kissed the top of her head, holding her a little tighter than usual. Sometimes people just can't stay. Grace nestled into him, satisfied with the answer in the way only a child could be. But Noah sat there long after she had fallen asleep against his shoulder, staring at the single crayon drawing taped to the fridge, 3 figures holding hands under a crooked sun. Dad, Grace, Emma. And with every passing minute, the silence in their small apartment grew louder than anything he had ever known. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Emma's absence echoed through their small apartment, in the empty spot at the dinner table where Grace sometimes set an extra napkin, in the bedtime routine where she asked for one more story because Miss Emma said she would. Noah tried to fill the gaps, but his voice sounded thinner, his laughter forced. Each night, when Grace drifted off with Bunny tucked under her arm, Noah lingered by the refrigerator where her latest masterpiece hung crookedly by a magnet. It was a crayon drawing, bold and uneven, but clear enough that it stole his breath every time he looked at it. 3 figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun, Grace in the middle, him on one side, and Emma on the other, her hair drawn in wild yellow strokes. Above their heads, in Grace's careful scrawl, was one word: family. That drawing broke something open in him. He had tried to protect himself, tried to shield Grace from disappointment by pushing Emma away before she could choose to leave. But the truth sat there in waxy colors. His little girl had already chosen Emma, and somewhere deep inside, so had he. So, on a gray Saturday morning, Noah found himself standing at the doors of the community center where Emma volunteered. The smell of finger paint and soap drifted out as he stepped inside. Children's laughter echoed from the hallways, bright and unguarded. And at the far end of the room, kneeling beside a broken toy, was Emma. She looked tired, her braid a little undone, shadows beneath her eyes. But when she noticed him, she froze, lips parting in surprise. Noah. He didn't let her finish. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the folded piece of paper, the drawing. He held it out, his voice low, steady, carrying the weight of all the words he had tried to bury. I know you think you don't belong in my world, that my life is too hard, too messy, that I'm not enough for someone like you. But Grace disagrees. She drew this. Emma unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. Her eyes scanned the figures, her lips pressing together as her breath hitched. Tears welled before she could stop them. She chose you, Noah said softly. And the truth is, I need you too, not because of what you have or the life you built, but because when you're near, my daughter laughs in a way I haven't heard in years. And when you're near, I start to believe maybe I can breathe again. Maybe I don't have to carry everything alone. Emma shook her head, her voice breaking. Noah, I can't be the one who ruins this. You've worked so hard to rebuild after everything you lost. I'm afraid I'll fail you. He stepped closer, his voice steady, even as his chest tightened. You wouldn't ruin anything. You'd make it real again. He reached for her hand, gently, like someone reaching for something fragile. I've been afraid for so long, afraid of loving again, of losing again. But you came into our lives and showed me that love isn't about perfect timing or perfect people. It's about choosing each other, even when it's hard. Her tears spilled then, slipping down her cheeks as the drawing shook in her hands. With a choked sound, she closed the space between them, folding into his arms. Noah held her tightly, not as a man rescuing someone broken, but as someone finally brave enough to admit he needed saving too. And in that embrace, in the quiet hum of children's laughter around them, Emma let herself believe for the first time that love could be stronger than fear, stronger than distance, stronger than the lines drawn between rich and poor. The library smelled faintly of old books and fresh coffee, a quiet refuge on a Saturday morning. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, scattering across the children's section where a circle of little ones sat cross-legged on a colorful rug. Parents lingered nearby, their coats draped over chairs, their voices hushed with polite conversation. At the center of it all sat Emma, her golden hair tied loosely back, her voice rising and falling with the cadence of the story she read. In her lap, nestled against her as though she had always belonged there, was Grace. The little girl giggled at every silly voice Emma used, her arms wrapped around Emma's waist and Bunny clutched tight between them. From the back of the room, Noah watched, his hands buried in the pockets of his worn jacket, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and quiet awe. For weeks he had convinced himself Emma couldn't stay, that their worlds were too different. Yet here she was, not in a boardroom or a penthouse, but on the floor of a library, her voice weaving magic through the pages of a children's book. The story ended with a soft closing of the cover, and the children clapped, their laughter ringing out. "Thank you, Miss Emma," one parent said warmly, and Emma smiled, thanking them in return. As the group began to disperse, Grace hopped from her lap and ran toward Noah, her curls bouncing. "Daddy, did you hear? Miss Emma made the panda hiccup." He scooped her up, pressing a kiss to her cheek, then looked back at Emma. She was gathering books, her cheeks flushed, her eyes catching his with a mixture of shyness and something deeper. He stepped forward, Grace still perched on his hip. "I used to think," Noah began, his voice carrying just enough to quiet the space around them, "that loving someone meant risking everything, that letting someone close was a cost I couldn't afford anymore." His gaze stayed on Emma, steady now, no longer hiding. "But then you came along, and you never asked for anything. You just showed up, again and again." Emma's breath caught, her hands pausing on the stack of books. The small crowd that lingered seemed to fade as his words filled the room. "You taught me that love isn't about promising forever," he continued. "It's about choosing today, and then tomorrow, and the day after that. You made both of us feel like we were enough, exactly as we are." Grace shifted in his arms, leaning closer to Emma with the certainty only a child could carry. She stretched one arm around her father's neck and the other around Emma's shoulder. "Miss Emma is part of our family now, okay, Daddy?" The library seemed still in that moment. Emma let out a choked laugh, tears spilling freely down her cheeks as she reached for Grace's hand. Her voice broke as she whispered, "For the first time, I don't feel alone anymore." Noah stepped closer, intertwining his fingers with Emma's. His grip was firm, steady, carrying all the unspoken promises he once feared to make. He didn't need grand speeches or perfect words. The warmth in her eyes and the weight of Grace's little arms around them said enough. And just like that, under the soft pink glow of morning light spilling through library windows, a family, imperfect, unexpected but real, was born. Not from wealth or status, but from presence, from stories read aloud, from laughter shared, from the brave act of choosing each other day after day. In the enchanting story of Noah Miller, a hardworking single dad burdened by dockyard toil and the tender responsibility of raising his daughter Grace, and Emma Collins, a successful CEO whose polished exterior hides a past of sacrifice and quiet strength, we discover a timeless life lesson. True love blooms not from perfect circumstances or shared status, but from the raw courage to embrace vulnerability and see beyond facades. Noah, scarred by loss and self-doubt, enters a blind date expecting rejection, only to find Emma's genuine warmth melting his defenses as she effortlessly bonds with Grace over grilled cheese and bedtime tales. His test, pretending to forget his wallet, reveals her unassuming kindness, while spying on her solitary evening of planning children's fundraisers exposes a soul unspoiled by wealth. Yet fear drives Noah to push her away, convinced his modest life would drag her down, until Grace's crayon masterpiece of their family shatters his illusions, reminding him that love isn't about matching worlds, but choosing hearts. This narrative tugs at the soul, evoking tears for anyone who's hidden behind walls of insecurity, whispering that authentic connections defy societal divides, healing wounds, and forging unbreakable bonds. In a world fixated on appearances, it urges us to drop pretenses and risk openness. For what begins as a reluctant encounter can evolve into a profound, life-altering union. If this tale stirred your emotions, resonating with your own journeys of unexpected love or overcoming self-doubt, share your heartfelt stories in the comments below. What blind leap taught you that vulnerability leads to belonging? And don't forget to subscribe for more soul-touching narratives of resilience, romance, and redemption. Your engagement keeps this community thriving, one inspiring chapter at a time.